As a reminder, always seek out training from the shop supervisor or the technical director before attempting any task or demonstrations in this video. If you have never performed a task that I discuss or demonstrate, especially if it is one of the more advanced tasks or operations, you should only attempt them under the supervision of the shop supervisor or the technical director, especially if it is your first time doing so. If you haven't done something recently or would like a refresher, ask to be retrained or have the shop supervisor or technical director supervise you performing the task. As always, be safe in the shops, on stage or backstage, or in the production support areas. This is the bandsaw. The bandsaw is named because it has one continuous band of a blade that runs in a big long oval. There's a top wheel up here, there's a lower wheel down there. You're not going to do a whole lot of adjustments, but you can inside here, but you can see how it works. This wheel goes around and the blade goes down like that. There's a guard on the blade protecting you from it. You have to open this up with a hex key, which I don't have right now, and then you can get access to visually seeing it. The bandsaw is considered one of the more dangerous tools in the shop, and that's because the stainless steel version of the bandsaw is used in the butcher shop. And the butcher shop cuts meat and bone and slices right through it. So in this case, this machine will quickly and readily slice through your fingers and bones. And because of that, we have certain safety precautions that we do to avoid putting us into that situation. Safety operating procedures are posted on the tool or next to the tool. These procedures represent the most important safety operations and considerations while using this tool or equipment, but are not intended to be comprehensive coverage of every possible use. For more complete safety instructions, please refer to the tool and equipment user manuals. Do not use this machine unless you have been instructed in its safe use and operations and you are complying with college and departmental shop safety guidelines and procedures. Safety glasses are required and must be worn at all times. All saws require safety glasses as minimum eye protection. Hearing protection is recommended. This tool does generate loud and high-pitched noise during operation. But if you are using this saw repeatedly, you should wear ear protection. Long or loose hair, neckties, and loose or baggy clothing must be contained. Tie back or tie up hair, roll up long sleeves, tuck in your shirt. A dust mask or respirator may be required for some operations. Rings, watches, and loose jewelry should not be worn. Gloves should not be worn while operating this tool. Pre-operational safety checks. Locate and ensure you are familiar with all machine operations and controls. Controls and adjustments may vary from tool to tool, particularly among different manufacturers of the same type of tool. One of the most important things with this Rikon bandsaw is highlighted on this placard here. You have to engage or disengage the tension on the blade. If you keep the bandsaw in full tension all the time, it's going to stress the blade. It's going to prematurely wear the tires. These wheels have little rubber tires on them. In this case, we did experience that with this one. We didn't keep disengaging it after we first bought it. And within a couple of years, all these tires were falling off and I had to replace them. And replacing the tires is kind of a challenge because they need to be snug and getting them to bend all over the wheel and get them in place properly is a bit of a hassle. But it is something you have to do occasionally if you've got one of these and you need to do long-term maintenance or you inherit an older one that has really bad tires. But keeping the tension released will extend the life of the blade and will extend the life of the tires of this wheel and the tire of this wheel. And this is a big reminder telling you to do that. Do not turn it on until it's engaged. And when you're done with it, make sure you turn it into the disengaged position. This is repeated on the back of the saw with a label over here saying disengage and a label over here saying engaged. And all I have to do is push that over, and now it is engaged. And on this one, I have a little chart here. I have a little arrow in here telling me what sort of pressure I've got and where I should be. I can't see it very well with the light, but it tells me I should probably be a little bit tighter for the size of this blade. It's telling me I've got the right tension for a 3/8 inch blade. We'll see how that works. This hasn't been used in a while. We'll see how it runs and how it behaves. Not every bandsaw has a big lever like this that takes it out of tension. And with those, long term, you probably want to release the tension on your own with the actual tension knob. This one has the tension knob on the bottom here, and the top wheel also has a tilt function on the back side, a wheel that causes it to tilt forward and backward. That allows you to get the blade centered on the wheel properly and properly positioned. It is one of the more complicated tools in terms of fine tuning, and if any one little part of this arrangement goes out of tune, it will not function as efficiently and as well and as accurately as you want it to be. So I don't really recommend in our shop that you adjust this unless you have been trained on how to do a full tune-up and adjustment of the blade. And every time you take a blade off and you put a new one on, you need to do that. But it's a little more involved and not what I'm going to get into in terms of a basic operation for the beginner user of the bandsaw. There are operations that you will do where you will accidentally pull the blade away from its wheels and its guides, the blade guides and the roller bearings on the bottom here, and then we'll have to reset it. And if that happens and you're a beginner user, get a hold of me or get a hold of the faculty that's teaching your class and get them to help you put it back in alignment. Don't try to adjust it yourself until you've had proper training on that, and that's a more advanced skill and procedure with this. On the back side here, we have a knob here that tightens or locks the blade guard, and this is the blade guard, and this can go up and down. This is a lock lever, and then in the back, this one has a dial that takes it up or down. And this should be adjusted to the minimum clearance it is going to need to get your work through. So probably something about like that with this board that I'm going to be cutting. The theory is the more blade you have exposed, the more of a danger your fingers have of coming into contact with that blade. So the blade guard should cover up as much of the blade as possible. So we're going to put that down to here, and then we're going to tighten it down, lock it off. There's an on button and a stop button over here. The green button is go for turning it on. And the red button turns it off. Some models of bandsaws have a foot brake. You can press the brake on the floor here and it will slow down and stop the wheels. This one does not have a foot brake. You just need to let it take its time to slowly spin down and come to a stop. And it happens pretty quickly. It's not like some of the other older machines that just take forever to spin down. There, it stopped. If you push this in all the way, it will lock, and then you will not be able to push the green button. And there's some arrows pointing this way. It just says to turn it that way, and it releases. If you just push it without all the way engaging it, that will usually stop it. But if you need to have an emergency, bam, emergency stop, and you're good to go. Loosen that up, and this will swing open, but it won't swing open because it's partway inside of here. And of course, you can't see that, can you? All right, now we can see the roller bearings better. We don't normally take that off if you're using the machine. I'm just taking it off for the video so that you can see how this works. This one has roller bearing guides. There are two kinds of guides. First of all, there are roller bearing guides and there are cool block guides. They should be really, really close to the blade without actually touching it. You can see I'm spinning them. They're not actually touching the blade. They're just a fraction of an inch shy of it. And the same with this bearing in the back. This bearing should not be touching the blade so that when pressure is pushed on the blade, it meets that bearing and has a little bit of resistance. If you have an older machine with cool blocks, you're going to have a little bit more work with them. They do get worn down. The bearings don't get worn down, but the cool blocks sometimes have to be rotated. They should also be as close to the blade as you can get without touching. The roller bearings or cool blocks should also be set back behind the teeth of the blade. If they are in front of the teeth of the blade as the teeth spin, the teeth are going to get chipped off or knocked off or dulled, and that's not going to be good. So there are guides here, and then on the bottom, there are the same set of guides, only flipped and reversed. There's two more roller bearing guides, and there's another back bearing for the blade. Or two more cool blocks and a back bearing for other machines. So you need to at least know what visually this is supposed to look like. If this is all the way forward and there's a huge gap back here, you need to have someone look at the saw and get it back into proper alignment. If you change out the blade and you put on a narrower blade, then you're going to have to make adjustments to the bearings. If you are adjusting the blade and putting a new blade in and adjusting the roller guides, you may have to shift this forward or backward a little bit to provide the proper clearance. But you can see now we can inspect the blade. We can put it back. I'm going to tighten this down again. Close it back up. And we're done. The table on the bandsaw can also tilt. It can tilt a little bit this way, but as you can see, when it tilts this way, it's only going to go so far before it hits the frame of the lower casing unit of the saw. And actually this one is designed not to go any further than that because it's got a stop under here that sets it back to perfect 90 degrees in relationship to the blade. So this one will only tilt one way unless we remove this stop and take that return mechanism out. The table tilt adjustment is in the back of the table of the bandsaw. There's a loosening knob, and over here is a knob that cranks it forward and backward. It's a really heavy table on this machine, this 22-inch bandsaw, so it needs a little bit of support, and that's why it has a lever that loosens up. And this knob can spin and do that. So you pull it out and it can relocate, and then you can spin it some more, and then you can crank this up. It looks like we have to get, looks like a wrench would be really helpful here. Let's get a wrench. I very rarely have a need to tilt the table, but should you need to do it, it is an option. It's probably going to be more accurate and more successful if you're doing this in soft materials. The blades of the bandsaw do have a tendency to deflect, and if you're using really hard lumber and you're trying to get a perfect angle, this is maybe not the best tool for that option, although this big 1-inch blade will hold itself and hold its stability much better than the ones on the smaller bandsaws. And this takes a 3/4 inch wrench. I could have gotten a crescent wrench, but it's probably better to operate this with the there we go, just like that. And it's going to want to come right back. It's really heavy, so that's why you've got to do this. And when you tilt it up, then you have to be ready to lock it down again. So the tilt function, it's kind of cool, huh? Most of them are not this fancy. When I'm loosening it, I want to make sure I have a hold of that knob that cranks it down because I don't want to lose control of it. So then we can just lower it down here. Back to normal. It should come, and that bolt should just rest right there. And we lock it so that it can't move. It does have a little bit of play in other directions sometimes. I'm noticing that while I was doing it, but it actually doesn't seem to be. Okay, I'm going to shut it. And then we tighten it. There is a gauge back here. I can't guarantee that it's been finely adjusted to be accurate. If you need to get that perfect angle, you'll need to get a measuring device and get your angle perfect. But it was, when we bought it new, squared to the table with this stop. Ensure all guards and guides are in place and properly functional. Upper guides should just clear the workpiece, no more than 1/4 of an inch. Guides and cool blocks that are out of adjustment or misaligned will decrease accuracy and performance of the bandsaw. Check the condition of the blade. The blade should be free of excessive pitch buildup. Use the correct blade for the task. Blade charts are posted near the bandsaw. Ensure the blade speed, blade tension, and blade tracking are properly adjusted. For the Rikon 22-inch bandsaw, ensure the blade tension lever is engaged before powering up and that the lever is disengaged at the end of the workday. Check your workspaces and walkways to ensure that no slip or trip hazards are present. Pick up cut-off scraps. Sweep up sawdust regularly. Keep the table and the work area clear of all tools, off-cut lumber, and sawdust. Always use the dust collection system if the saw is attached to one. Operational safety checks. These are safety checks you must be aware of at all times while using the tool, and you must check them and perform them every time you use the tool on every single operation or cut. Keep your hands away from the blade at all times. Do not position your hands, fingers, or thumbs directly in front of the blade. Always keep them to one side or the other. Be aware that your hands will move toward the front of the blade while making curved cuts. Always use a push stick for small pieces or for any stock that will otherwise require your fingers to be close to the blade. Always allow the blade to come to maximum speed before proceeding with the cut. Never start the saw with the blade touching the material. Avoid attempts to cut in a radius that is too tight for the width of the installed blade. Refer to the chart in the laminated sheets on bandsaw blade selection and usage. Avoid backing out while the saw is in operation. If you need to back out, stop the machine, wait for the blade to stop, then back out carefully. Backing out can cause the blade to walk forward and come off of the wheels. Minimize your backing out operations whenever possible. Know when and how to use relief cuts for curves with a smaller radius. Before clearing waste and debris, switch the tool off and wait for the machine to come to a complete stop. Before making adjustments, switch the tool off and wait for the machine to come to a complete stop. This machine will quickly and readily slice through your fingers and bones. And because of that, we have certain safety precautions that we do to avoid putting us into that situation. The most important is never to be pushing with your hands directly in front of the blade. Because if the wood slips, you could slice and push your fingers in, and they could go right through the blade pretty quickly. Instead, what you want to do is you want to have your hands on either side of the blade. So if you slip and you go past the blade. And that's going to prevent you from slicing off any digits. You can have both hands on one side and both hands on the other side. It's not so important where you stand. This saw is probably not going to kick back at you like the table saw, but it's just important that your hands stay well clear of that zone in front of the blade. We talked about where your hands should be while you're operating this saw, and that means that no digits or no hands should be in front of the blade, just in case you slip or it moves more quickly through the material than you expect and you lose control. If your hands are on either side of it, they will go past it. Likewise, while the blade is spinning, you do not need to reach in here and try to fish out any little shaved off pieces of wood. Little shaved off pieces of wood will get caught in the gap here around the blade, and that's will happen. So if that happens, turn the saw off, wait for the blade to come to a complete stop, and then fish your pieces out. But don't try to do it while the machine is running. I have these notches to cut out of this board for a project, and I'm going to do that on the video. So one of the rules here of the bandsaw is that you want to minimize your backing out in general, whether the blade is running or not. If I have to cut this, I have to come all the way in here, and then I have to back the blade out, and then I have to come all the way in here and back the blade out. So this is a long travel for backing out the blade. If I back out while the saw blade is moving, I'm probably going to shift the board left and right, and that's going to catch on the blade, and it's going to cause the blade to come with the wood, and that's going to pull it off of its wheels. And we don't want to do that. So we want to minimize the amount of backing out. If I'm doing two cuts that come to a corner here, and I've got a long one and I've got a short one, I want to do the short one first and then come back and do the long one so that the piece falls out and I've minimized the amount of backing out. I'll do a demonstration of that as well. Backing out is going to be the most likely way that you will pull the blade off of the wheels. And you can even pull it off of the wheels and pull it out of alignment when the saw is off. I'm probably going to go all the way in with one cut and back out, and then go all the way in with the other one and back out slightly so that I can then come and cut out here and let the pieces fall out, and I can kind of clean that up. I don't need this to be, for this project, to be a perfect cut here. And I've got a really thick piece of lumber. It's almost 3 inches here. I'm not going to be able to do this effectively with a jigsaw. The jigsaw, when it's trying to cut through so many layers of plywood, it's going to deflect and it's going to be a real messy cut. So I think I can do this with this bandsaw. We're going to see. I might be better off doing these cuts with this saw and then doing the other little cuts with the smaller 10-inch bandsaw. Although this is a bit of a hefty piece for the 10-inch bandsaw. It does have a jaw throat height that will accommodate it, so it theoretically should be possible. The other thing to keep in mind is our throat width here. I only have from here to cut my pieces and line them up. So while I think I can actually cut all my pieces here and still have space, you may encounter it where your board is too long and I've got this piece out here and I need to cut this notch. So in that case, you're going to have to turn your piece over and mark it on the other side, and then you can cut your piece. I've marked this one on the other side just in case I need to do it from this side. It might be easier, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Let's dive into this project and see what we can do. I'm having a little trouble seeing my line. So I'm going to raise this up just a little bit so I can see. Now I can see the blade and my line, and I think I'm happier with that. For this project, I'm cutting all the way to my line and I'm just going to cut it off. It's not something that the finished edge is kind of important. This is going to be a shelf for storing jigsaws, so no one's going to really be experiencing this cut. I'll make it as clean as I can get it. But if I was cutting something that then needed to be sanded and perfectly cut to a line, I want to cut a little bit shy of the line so that I have room to sand to the line. Now that my saw has stopped, I'm going to back it out. I'm going to be real careful. I pull that out and bam, I'm ready to go for the next one. If I do back out with the saw on, I need to be real careful. I'm not pulling that blade. Now I know backing out on a straight line is relatively manageable and I can do that and not pull the blade off. I just did a curve. Backing out on a curve, I'm much more likely to pull the blade out with me. So I didn't want to do that while the machine was running. We'll show you this curve. This was the best I could manage with that blade, and it wasn't enough to get me in the corner to let this piece fall out. So I need to back up to about here and cut and curve. We'll see if we can get that. I'm reaching behind here. I'm nowhere near the blade. And here's my piece of material that's fallen out. Now I can more easily cut out the remainder of the piece. I have a lot of little pieces here. This is often the case with a bandsaw because you are shaving off tiny little pieces often and doing relief cuts and a variety of other things. So these are the kinds of things that could easily get jammed in there and have to cause you to stop the machine and fish them out later. This is probably the best I can do. I can then take this and I can get a file and I can clean it up if I want as much as I need to. But again, I'm not concerned about this being a perfect cut and perfect finished piece. It's going to be inside a cabinet. It's going to be way in the back. It's going to be dark. I'm not going to agonize over the quality of that cut. But you did notice that I have to go forward and back, and I've made a lot of little shavings to get that off to this level. And then I can, if this were something that were I cared about that surface, then I could sand that and file it until it was just perfect. The important thing with the saw is that I need to be moving forward at some slight speed that's appropriate with the thickness of the blade in order to make any cuts. You can never turn in spot and readjust the wood. You can't just stop where you're at and turn the wood in place. You have to be progressing forward with every curve, and you can control the speed of which you're progressing forward, and that is limited to the physical size and depth of the blade and how much of a curve it can cut. As we said, with this 1-inch blade, I can cut a 7-inch diameter, which is not a very tight curve whatsoever. But I can only make that type of a cut as I'm doing it and as I'm moving forward. All right, let's get the rest of these cut. These cuts on the end, this one and this one, it may look like in the video that my hand was directly in front of the blade, but I've got a good 2.5 inches here. And I made sure my thumb and hand was all the way in the corner and my cut line is all the way here. I'm plenty clear of the blade because this is where the cut line is and this is where my fingers were. Same thing over here. Now, if I were to turn this and come at this corner, I have to be aware of that. And now my thumb has pivoted into the line of the blade. And as I'm coming to this corner, that would be a point where I need to move my hand over here. I think in the video, I'm not sure now what I did, but I think on both of these, I went this way and then I went the other way on the outside one. So I was never pushing my fingers into the blade. We'll do some similar demonstrations in the smaller one and talk about relief cuts and some other things because I can more easily demonstrate curves on the 10-inch bandsaw with the smaller blade. But I can't really demonstrate curves on this. This one's got that 1-inch blade. It was most excellent for these straight cuts. I got some really nice clean cuts out of my machine here. If I want to, I can clean these up. I can sand these things down. I can grind them. I can get a file in there, whatever tool I can get in there. I'll probably just hit off some of these little shavings and not do much more than that because it's in a storage cabinet and it's going to be way in the back and there's going to be tools hiding it. So it's never going to be under scrutiny or inspection, so I don't need it to be perfect. We are done with this bandsaw. We need to clean it up. We need to sweep up our mess. We need to dust things off. We need to disengage the lever in the back here, take the tension out, save that life of the blade, save the life of the tires, keep this thing in good shape. And that way, when it's not used for a year and a half, I can come in here and turn it on today and it's still 100% tuned and still working fine because we're taking care of it. This one has a 3/8 inch blade, I'm gonna think, or no, it's about a 1/4 inch blade. That looks like about a 1/4 inch blade. So I'm gonna be able to cut some pretty fine curves on that. What does my chart say here? 1/4 inch blade. I can cut a 5/8 inch radius with the 1/4 inch blade. That's pretty tight. That's pretty tight. I'm going to be cutting 3/4 inch pine. So I need to lower my guard down, and it's the same principle as the other Rikon. It's got a lock on this side and then a lever or a dial that brings it up and down. This doesn't have that big shield in it, so I can actually get a lot closer to my lumber without obscuring my cut. We're going to be doing some curves with this. I'm going to draw some curves on my board and talk about different ways of doing it. If we're doing an outside curve, that's real easy. If it's gradual like that, I'm probably going to be able to make that cut with this blade. If it's something more dramatic, I'm probably not going to be able to cut that tight of a curve with this blade. So I'm going to have to do some fancy things. I'm going to probably cut this way, and then I'm going to cut in a series of cuts. That's going to create a layer of facets. And then for here, I'm going to do what are called relief cuts. I'm going to do a cut in like that, and that, and that, and that. And the same thing here, here, and here, and here. And those are going to then fall away when I come through with my blade. Ching, 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 ching. Ching, 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 ching. Those are your two guiding principles with doing small curves. And remember, I have to be progressing forward in order to curve. I can't just turn it in place and force it. That's going to twist the blade. It's going to pull the blade out of alignment. It's going to potentially cause the blade to break and other things. I'm going to cut this on this side because I don't think I have enough room to cut it on this side because my throat isn't big enough. If my goal was to get to the red line, I want to stop a little shy of it and then sand it the rest of the way, if that's my goal. I don't want to try and get perfect with this saw. I'm not going to make it perfect. It's too easy to slightly go off and then you have to come and sand it. And if you sand it into your good part of your wood, then you're in trouble. Now we're going to make those relief cuts. As I'm making this cut, I'm going to be very conscious of where my hands are, where I turn, and when my hands are now in front of the blade. And if they are in front of the blade, I need to move my hands over here and get outside of the blade. I had to turn my board over to get those other cuts. Now, I don't have a line on the back side of my wood, but I did have those relief cuts, so I didn't cut past the relief cuts. It looks like I'm still pretty good. So now this has given me a lot of good range to be able to come back in with files, rat tail files, and sand that all down and hand file it down and get it exactly where I want it. It's going to take a little bit of work, but that's woodworking for you, right? Now with this other cut, I should be able to do this cut and follow the line pretty cleanly. So not here, this is bad. I couldn't do this last little bit because I was hitting back here. But I could have done this entire curve from this side if I wanted to. It's pretty clean. Nice, clean little cut. Does seem to be deviating. It's not a perfectly straight up and down cut. Means I need some fine tuning to do with this machine. Unfortunately, this little guy doesn't stay in tune as much as the other one. And it has a much thinner blade and it's been under tension the whole time. So the blade is probably a little stretched out and I probably need to tighten it some more. But there's a limit to how far I can tighten this blade on this machine. Because if I overstretch it too much, this wheel is going to eventually bottom out up here and then I can't stretch it out anymore. So you do need to be a little bit gentle with the very thin blades and kind of be protective of them because they do get damaged a little bit and stretched out and overworked a lot. So this is the tension that pulls the thing up and down. In the back here is a knob that tilts the top wheel forward and backward to get it aligned properly. And we'll do a separate video on setting up the blade. Being a first-time user, you're probably going to make some mistakes and pull the blade off the wheels and stress the blade out, break some blades, especially with the smaller one. It's going to happen. But try to follow the guidelines, try to be safe. We can do one more cut, get a little bit fun with it. We can do see if we can do that cut with it. And again, every time I'm going to be turning, I'm going to be conscious of where my hands are. If the turn puts them in front of the blade, I'm going to change my position. And I'll be doing that on the fly without talking about it. a nice clean cut. Now remember, as I'm cutting this curve, I have to be progressing forward as I'm cutting the curves. I can't just stop and turn in place. There is no blade on the bandsaw that will allow you to do that. If you want to be able to do cuts like that, you need to get yourself a scroll saw and get yourself one of these spiral blades or other blades that will cut in any direction. The bandsaw only cuts in the forward motion. So you have to be progressing forward. Even if it's a real slow forward, you are progressing forward. And if it looked like I was turning in place in the video, it's because I was progressing forward very, very slowly. And this blade allowed me to just sort of creep around some of those tight curves. These are potential hazards to be aware of while operating this tool. The most important safety concern on the bandsaw is the potential for your fingers to come into contact with the blade. Keep the guard covering as much of the blade as possible. Always keep your fingers away from the blade while cutting. Use a push stick where needed. This is a cutting tool, so it will be expelling flying chips and sawdust. Chips and sawdust can be propelled at high speeds and cause injury to exposed skin. Always wear protective clothing and PPE. Normal operation of the bandsaw frequently puts fingers in close proximity to the moving blade. Always keep hands and fingers to the sides of the blade during use. Flying chips and sawdust could cause eye injuries. Always wear safety glasses while using this tool. Noise levels can rise above 100 decibels. Protect your ears by wearing hearing protection while using this tool. Do not use faulty equipment. If something is not working properly, or if you suspect something is wrong with the tool or machine, please report this to your instructor and/or to the A&L technical director. This is a wood cutting bandsaw, not a metal cutting bandsaw. Never cut ferrous metal with a wood cutting bandsaw, even if you install a metal cutting blade. Doing so will shorten the life of many wood cutting saw components like rubber tires and blade guides. Only cut non-ferrous metal if the manufacturer recommends it and only with the correct blade installed. Never push the stock through the machine while your hands are in line with the blade. Keep both hands and all fingers to one side of the blade or the other at all times. Do not adjust the upper guides to more than 1/4 inch above the work. We do have a portable dust collector back here, and this one's shared amongst 3 or 4 machines, so if you're using this one, go ahead and hook it up to this machine. Normally it will be running and it'll be collecting sawdust both from here and from the bottom. If I don't run that dust collector, then there's going to be a lot of sawdust buildup on the inside of the lower wheel. I put on my 3-layer cloth dust mask to protect myself from the dust I'm about to blow in there, and I'm not breathing it. This should be periodically opened up. Blown out as well. So I would recommend doing that after each use, and the same thing with, pull it past there. It does have a nice little brush on here. I don't know if you can see that. Oh, you can't see it. In here, lots of sawdust likes to collect. Right. Housekeeping. Turn off the machine and return all guards to fully closed positions. Stay with the machine until the blade comes to a complete stop. Use the foot brake on the tool to slow the machine to a full stop if it is equipped with one. Remove any cutting stops or jigs. Leave the saw ready for use by the next person. Leave the machine and counter in a safe, clean, and tidy state. Put away off-cut lumber. Toss scraps into the trash bins. Sweep and dust off the counter, the machine, and the floor. There are safety guidelines for the bandsaw. They are up here, some instructions and safety guidelines. On the back side of this, we have blade selection guides. We have 4 different bandsaws here. We have the small Rikon, the 10-inch bandsaw. We have the 22-inch bandsaw. And then we have a couple of metal bandsaws, a portable bandsaw and a horizontal bandsaw. So I've made charts so you know which blades belong with which machines, and you can get that correctly sized with the blade if you should need to. But we'll do additional safety videos going over the blades. I also have this handy little chart here with some more guidelines and instructions on what kind of blades they are, what kind of teeth configurations you have, all kinds of information, more than you would want to know with a bandsaw. But if you want to become an expert at this tool, you probably want to become familiar with everything that's inside this little chart. One of the more important things on this is a little chart that says what size radius you can cut with your thickness of the blade. And this says that a 1-inch blade, which I think I've got a 1-inch blade on there, can cut no more smaller than a 7-inch radius. It has to be a pretty slow moving curve to be able to cut on this. The bandsaws are kind of nice for cutting curves depending on the size of the blade, but cutting straight cuts and cutting curves, it does both depending on what type of blade and what type of fences and other attachments you set up. This 1-inch blade is kind of a resawing blade. It's designed to cut through very thick stock and trim it down into smaller stock for fine woodworking in hardwoods and slicing your hardwood into smaller pieces for appropriate to your project. If you have to move the bandsaw around and you don't have a nice mobile tool base for it, then I recommend that you do not muscle it around by the table. This table is pretty beefy on this 22-inch Rikon bandsaw, but they're not all so beefy, and they do have breakable parts, especially the lower end user models, some of the smaller 14-inch bandsaws and smaller ones like that. If nothing else, what you're gonna do when you wrench it around by the table is you're going to knock that table out of square, and then you have to reset it again. If you have to move it around, grab it by something solid. This metal post is really pretty solid on every bandsaw. It secures this big wheel to that big wheel, and they have to stay in place. So this is probably the best part to grab your bandsaw, and if you have to muscle it around, this one is a real beast to muscle around if it's not on wheels. Sometimes they come up, these bigger ones come off the pallet with a eye bolt in the top, and you have to use a motor winch to pull it off of the pallet and set it down in place. If not, you have to figure out a way to get some span sets around it and lift it up into place. But this one is a bit of a beast. That's why I have it on wheels. I want to be able to move it around if I need to. I don't think I locked it down. So as I said, do not pull it by the table. Better to guide it and push it this way. Or grab it by the upper arm here. But don't position it by the table. Grab it by some of the solid cast iron metal units. The table is attached usually to the frame by a couple of trunnions, and those trunnions are the weak spot. And I have broken them on a smaller 14-inch bandsaw. And then you have to order the parts because now your table doesn't sit in place. So don't muscle them around by the table. Muscle them around by up here. Even if they're on the wheels and on the mobile carts, guide it with this part or with your hands on this part. This is one of those home user model bandsaws. This one is an American brand. The brand is American, and it's very similar to a model you might get from Powermatic or a number of other similar manufacturers. Powermatic is a good brand. They do make some big beefy machines, but they also make this 14-inch kind of middle of the road end user, home craftsman model version. And it's got some shortcomings. And one of them is the mounts underneath here of how the table mounts to the frame. If I'm moving this around and I don't have the mobile wheelbase that I have here, I want to grab it by here or by here or by the frame, maybe get a hand truck, wheel it around with a hand truck. This one's small enough that I could move it around with a hand truck. What I don't want to do is come over here and wrench it around by the table. This is the one that I have done that with a long time ago. And the thing that I did, I broke this little piece, and that you can see is a slightly different color gray than the rest of the machine. And that's what was replaced. And these were cheap pot metal things that break real easily. So it's real easy to break these cast parts that aren't made out of really good quality industrial cast iron. You don't want to wrench it around. And we can see already this table is not even level, and that's because it goes out of adjustment real easily. The less you pay for your bandsaw, the harder it is going to be to keep it in alignment, most likely. This has the guides that are cool blocks, and you can see this is even out of alignment. This is supposed to be pushed behind the teeth. It doesn't go any further behind the teeth. So I actually need to adjust the blade so that it's properly centered on the wheel. I probably will pull this cover off and it's not properly centered on the wheel. But the first thing I want to do is I want to get this thing into square. And you can see it's not in square here at all. It's very, very far off. So I can loosen the front knob, and I can loosen the front and the back knobs, and I can do this back and forth and get it into square. It looks like it's also tilting a little bit forward, backward. I should have a better square for doing this, a tri-square or some smaller square, but this is all I have in the shop here, and that's a little too far. And then I want to tighten that down. And then as long as I don't muscle it around by the table, it should stay relatively square. There is no positive stop here. There is no way to come back to zero easily. The old pieces did have a sticker on here with a gauge. The replacement parts did not come with the sticker. I'm even missing a mounting bolt. Wow. So I have to trust and rely 100% on my measurement of my table to my blade. And that's probably a good thing. Sometimes if you've got stickers and alignments, it's good for getting you close. But unless you're keeping it in 100% fine tune, if you trust that to be accurate and it's slightly off, and you don't realize that till after you've cut dozens of pieces, then you kind of wasted a bunch of lumber, you wasted your time, you wasted money, you wasted a little bit of everything. So you can use this as a rough guide if it has a marking on it, like the tape measure on the rip fence of the table saw. But if you really want accuracy, you're going to do the measurements yourself and get the angle right, get the distance from the blade right with a tape measure. You're not going to trust those things to be 100% accurate. The cool blocks on the bottom are also out of whack. Everything's out of whack on this bandsaw. Wow. So again, I loosen both knobs. And now I can tilt it about 5 degrees this way. And I can tilt it quite a bit this way. I think that's about it. That's about the maximum. Now, when I want to put it back to zero, I have to get out my square and square it up yet again. That's going to be a best guess. Again, a smaller square would be better to get more accurate.